This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Happy Halloween.
It's an absurd holiday.
Oh yes, putting on costumes and striking fear. Quite absurd.
Halloween in Gotham is the perfect time for revenge. What's happened?
Johnny Beatty was murdered tonight.
And only the Dark Knight can unmask the killer. Nice outfit, Bats. Batman, the Long Halloween. Trick or treat.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 182 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me my good brother, good friend, and the man that runs our Twitter account. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 182 of the DCAU Review.
That's right, and we are in the spooky season, of course.
Ooh.
Just one day away from Halloween at the time of recording. I mean, the show's live.
Always, whenever anybody presses play, we just have to restart again.
That's right. But as of this time, it's the day before Halloween, and so we thought, what better thing to bring you than a somewhat themed review? And we have that for you here today, and we will continue this theme next week. But today we are talking all about the Batman, the Long Halloween Part 1 movie that was released just this past summer on Blu-ray and now available for streaming.
There you go. On your favorite streaming service, HBO Max. It's a wonderful streaming service. Not available in all countries. Not also an official sponsor, but would gladly take that sweet AOL money or Warner Brothers money or whoever owns that. Whoever owns AT&T. That's what I meant, not AOL. AOL is not a company anymore. Anyway, all right. Yes, we are indeed reviewing a movie, and this is only like one of the few times that this has happened. I think probably once or twice in the episodes we've covered thus far. I know we did Justice League versus the Fatal Five. We also did Superman Red Son right after that had come out. But generally, we let some time lapse before we tend to do reviews here, Liam. But this one, as you said, very relevant for several reasons. The second part was released in July, so we have both parts available here. As mentioned, it is the spooky season. It's themed. It's the fifth week of our month, which means we tend to do an Elseworlds tale as it is. Plus, coming up in just in a few short weeks here, we actually have a brand new Long Halloween special that's being released by DC Comics as sort of a companion piece, I assume, or maybe a continuation of some of the original storylines here, which were done by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, which if you've been living under a rock, or perhaps if you just haven't, you've probably at least heard of Batman Long Halloween prior to this being a animation adaptation. But if you didn't, it's probably regarded in maybe top 3, maybe top 2 best Batman stories of all time. You know, it's ranked pretty high up there with maybe, you know, The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, maybe Hush, and then you have Batman The Long Halloween. It's a pretty famous book, Liam, set of issues that's been released several times as graphic novels. And one of the things that I was looking forward to with talking about this is, this is one of your favorite books of all time, just from a writing standpoint, and certainly I think the artwork is near and dear to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the first comics that I feel like when I was I think I was just the right age. I was probably 14 or 15, and maybe was starting to feel like I was beginning to maybe grow out of superheroes and stuff and such, as silly as that sounds now to be in my late 20s talking about superhero cartoons every week. But at the time, you know, you're getting a little bit older and you're into your teenage years, and maybe you think you're growing out of certain things. And I remember reading this and just being so taken with it and so wrapped up in this wonderful mystery and this, you know, very sort of moody and atmospheric art that Tim Saylor, it may be Tim Solly, I've heard it pronounced both ways, so apologies if whichever one of us is pronouncing it wrong. I do We both apologize.
Tim,
But,
we'll just call him Tim.
Yes,
We can pretend like we're on our first name basis.
Yes, but yes, Tim's incredible art, and I will also mention the colorist. I believe is a man named Gregory Wright. But it's a great mystery story, and I feel like it helped me deepen my appreciation for what these stories could be, and sort of how you could weave a tale that you have those big over the top superhero heroics and garish costumes and all that stuff. It doesn't shy away from that side of the superhero comic, but you can also, kind of look in a little bit deeper as you not only deal with Batman's struggle to try to find the killer, but also the struggles of kind of some of our other main characters like Harvey Dent and Jim Gordon. So I think it really did help me appreciate the superhero comics as a storytelling medium a little bit more. So yeah, it holds a very near and dear place in my heart, and I was obviously very, very excited. I know there had previously been an adaptation of another of Mr. Loeb's Batman stories, that of course being his classic with Jim Lee on the pencils in Hush, and that one tended to deviate by the end, deviated a bit more from the source material than I think a lot of people would like. So I wasn't sure what to think when I heard this was being adapted, especially when we kind of got a look at the art style and saw that it appeared to sort of be tied in with some of the other recent DC animated straight to video movies, like the Superman one and the recent Justice Society movie that came out as well, when it appeared that this might also be part of its own little shared universe. I think there were people that were a little concerned that maybe this too would begin to deviate, but we can get into how well this holds up to the comic books and where it deviates, and maybe some ways that it deviates for the better. But before we get into that, Cal, and we get into our plot, I must of course start us off with the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode.
Of course you must, because it's an episode that we're reviewing, or in this case, a movie that we're reviewing. So we must get the official synopsis from IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, which, by the way, this segment still free to be sponsored. So if you'd like to sponsor this segment, shoot us slide into our DMs, if you will. On social media at DCAU Review. But yes, Liam, this movie was originally released on June the 22nd, 2021. As we mentioned, not even close to being a year old just yet. But yes, let's hear that official IMDb synopsis.
That's right. This is for Batman: The Long Halloween Part 1, which was written by Tim Sheridan, of course, based on the comic by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, directed by Chris Palmer, with music by Michael Gatt and animation by Edge Animation Co. And that synopsis reads as such. Batman investigates a murder spree that takes place on holidays.
Oh, no.
Come on. One of the worst we've ever done.
Come on, like that's on the cover. Like that's basically like, yeah, you can pretty much figure that out from reading the first two sentences of the Wikipedia article. Like, come on, guys, that's an F. I'm sorry, that's lazy. That's pure laziness. Somebody that's a contributor to IMDb, go in there immediately and edit that and add some more sustenance, please, because goodness gracious. But yes,
that does leave us to our work being a bit cut out for us, but that is sort of our titular. There is a holiday killer, as we come to find out, but this is obviously a lot deeper than just a new serial killer arriving in Gotham City, as it also involves several of the sort of classic Batman crime family, the sort of the mafia side of the Gotham City underworld, with characters like with Carmine Falcone, of course, from the Frank Miller Batman Year One story, that of course has gone on to appear in other mediums like the Christian Bale Batman films and things like that, as well as some of the other mob bosses, and sort of they're sort of beginning to die out and give way to these this new breed of super criminal. And there. So as one empire is crumbling, Batman has to make some new friends in order to try to keep the city from falling into complete chaos.
Yeah, and that's truly what the whole and we can do the kind of comparison throughout the original source material versus what the movie ended up doing here. But yeah, the whole stories you mentioned sort of in our intro here is about these three characters and ultimately this pact that Batman makes with Jim Gordon and Harvey Dent. Harvey Dent, of course, the district attorney. Jim Gordon, the captain, I believe he is. He's not commissioner just yet. He's Captain Jim Gordon. So still in charge of a lot of the police, and their job here is to do what they can to stop the violence and begin cleaning up the city. I think it's pretty much encapsulated in the movie, where in this initial interaction that we see between Bruce and Alfred, and they're sitting here in Bruce's study, and just above them is the classic photo or painting of Thomas and Martha Wayne.
Master Bruce, happy Halloween.
Is there coffee?
In the study, sir. A Miss Kyle telephoned. She said she was checking the number you gave her to make sure it's real.
The gates are open. We haven't seen a trick-or-treater in years. We won't see one tonight. Hardly worth the security risk, wouldn't you say?
Respectfully, sir, if our security is dependent on $600 worth of iron alloy...
This city is fallen, Alfred.
Then we must endeavor to lift it up again, Bruce.
And that's sort of what these three men have come into a pact to agree to do. And that is sort of from the inside out here to try and derail some of the corruption and the stranglehold that these mob bosses have over the city of Gotham. And in order to do that, they begin stepping on some toes. And sort of, I don't know, blurring the lines a little bit. We have one scene early on in the movie where, which was faithfully adapted from the source material, where the Falcone is moving some of his fortune, is having difficulty laundering some of his money. So there's a warehouse that Batman is led to by Catwoman of all people to sort of help him out and discover this warehouse full of cash. And in a scene straight out of The Dark Knight, we have this mountain of cash, and Batman and Harvey Dent with Catwoman standing by have to kind of decide what they're going to do, because they realize that with the amount of people that Falcone has on his payroll, that even if they were to turn these funds over to the police at this point, that the funds would be right back in Falcone's hands shortly thereafter. So it's interesting because here in this storytelling from the movie, we have Batman introducing a coin to Harvey Dent as a way to sort of help him decide which way to go within this gray area. He literally pulls out a coin and convinces Harvey to select, choosing whether to burn this money or to do what they were originally going to do and turn it over to the police. And what ends up happening is they end up, apparently it was heads, and they decided to burn it. So the money is then burnt, and this of course is a way to send a message to the Falcone family. And Falcone's immediate response is to decide that he's going to show up to Harvey's house and retaliate. And that's kind of where we get things kind of kicked off here and start learning some more about Harvey Dent's role in all of this as well.
Yeah, and that brings us to maybe one of the first deviations, I think, from the book, is that more focus is put on Harvey Dent's home life. His wife Gilda is a character in the Long Halloween, but she's kind of just kind of the doting wife. She's not a particularly developed character, at least not at first in the first few issues. So they kind of put on the spot that, again, which I think is something as you and I who have been reviewing Batman the Animated Series and these other DCAU shows for years now would note is that, much like in Batman the Animated Series, they sort of established pretty early on here that long before, the spoiler alert, half of his body gets burned and he turns into Two-Face, that he already sort of has these issues, both not only with his own psychiatric issues, but his wife clearly has some as well, and there's this sort of deep unhappiness. We sort of find out later that at least part of it is due to her inability to conceive, and that this has put quite a bit of strain on their relationship. And so you see, much like Batman himself, much like that we have a scene also of Gordon sort of disappointing his kids and his wife on Halloween night, as they were all sort of, everyone's sort of we see our three main heroes here all sort of leading these double lives and all sort of letting their personal lives suffer as a result of their duty and of their crusade to stop Falcone and the rest of the criminal underworld. But that of course does lead to seemingly in retaliation for the death of the Roman's nephew, Harvey Dent returns home to his wife, only for the house to explode, and that leads to a pretty dramatic sequence there, as we're not quite sure who is responsible, though it appears that perhaps this is not the work of Falcone, at least not directly, and that it might be another one of the mobs in Gotham City, that being in this case the triads or the Chinese mafia of some sort. And that leads to Batman having a pretty cool fight. We'll definitely talk more about in visuals as he tracks down. That's kind of another deviation from the book, where in the book it was the Irish mob that put the hit out on Dent, or that carried out the hit on Dent, and here it's the Chinese mob, and that leads to Batman having a confrontation with a certain sewer dwelling zombie that once again is that, and that's one of those things where I wouldn't have been surprised if that got completely cut, because there is a moment in the book where he's chasing down this mobster, and he runs into the sewers and runs afoul of Solomon Grundy, and Batman and Grundy sort of have this brief scuffle, but they did include that still, and Batman's actually able to kind of talk Grundy into letting him take this Mickey Chen into custody and letting him take him away, and we get some interrogation there where we realize sort of it's not just that they went after Falcone's money that's the issue, or that Dent is this great crusading DA. It's that they actually believe, or it seems that it's becoming a nasty rumor within the Gotham underworld, that Harvey Dent is leading a double life, not only as this crusading district attorney, but also he might have been the man who pulled the trigger and killed the Roman's nephew. So, and that is not only gets the attention of the Gotham City crime families, but it also gets the attention, as we find out soon, of a certain clown.
That's right. And that's sort of the culmination. And it's interesting, we have this killer that they begin calling the Holiday Killer because he's murdered people on various different holidays. As we open up the movie, it's opened up, as you mentioned, is Carmine Falcone's nephew is killed in cold blood and in his own bathtub. And this was reportedly just hours before he was going to become a state's witness and kind of flip on the Falcone family. So there's this whole intrigue and mystery as to, and multiple people with motives as to who could possibly be behind this.
3 murders on 3 holidays. Each of the victims a Falcone associate, all shot with the same type of untraceable gun. No witnesses.
Suspects? Salvatore Moroni. His family's always been second to the Roman. He's notoriously ambitious.
But he's killed Falcone's men in broad daylight. Why the cloak and dagger holiday business? Carla Vitti, Falcone's sister, runs their Chicago operation.
She could be making a play for control of the family.
By killing her only son on Halloween?
She is a criminal.
And he is a homicidal maniac.
The guard testified that he escaped before the first murder.
The Roman himself.
Johnny Vitti was about to flip, and Mickey Chen could testify that Falcone ordered Dent's murder. He had motive to silence them both. But why kill his own bodyguard?
May I ask why you're keeping the fifth suspect off the board?
Because I don't like it.
But it fits, doesn't it?
It's interesting because here, at least in the film adaptation here, or the animated adaptation that we have here, it's really delving into the psyche of Batman having to become a detective. There's more than one discussion that he has with Jim Gordon, and especially this one interaction. There's a good cop, bad cop scene, as you mentioned, with this Mickey Chen, where they're trying to grill him. And at the end of it, after not really being able to get any information out of him, Gordon sort of chastises Batman to say that while he's good at bringing in the criminals, he has a lot to work on with the detective side of things and being able to get information and to sort of accumulate clues and figure out what things are doing. And later on in the Batcave also, there's this conversation that Batman has with Alfred where he's trying to piece things together, but he's so very reluctant to be this detective. He even says that he thought the job was simply going to be cleaning up the streets, not having to put clues together. So that's really one of the main tension pieces that we have here, is Batman really being stretched. At least this seems to be early on in his career, where he hasn't had to have been a detective before. And as you mentioned, so we have this killer that's been killing on the holidays. And then right around Christmas time, I guess a certain clown has gotten wind of what's going on and is not too happy that somebody else might be trying to steal his thunder. So Batman actually goes to Arkham Asylum with Commissioner Gordon and begins interviewing the Calendar Man, who of course would be my first suspect if somebody was killing people on holidays. But Calendar Man is in fact in Arkham, and it's interesting because he mentions not only and lets Batman subtly know that the Joker may have escaped Arkham, but he also seems to point the finger towards Harvey Dent.
This is a waste of time.
I told you to bring Mr. Dent. He isn't safe out there.
The TA who put you all in Arkham? Half the patients here would kill him on sight, so I'd say out there is the only place he is safe.
Perhaps. Or perhaps he doesn't know you're here. Perhaps the district attorney is a suspect.
We learn as he's sort of discussing the case with Alfred that, they have not allowed Harvey Dent to have a gun because of his psychological profile. There was something he alludes to that came up in their psychological profile that prevented him from being able to obtain a gun license. So there's lots of little breadcrumbs being strewn along here to saying, maybe Harvey Dent does have motive, but then you have lots of other things being thrown in also.
Yeah. There's a few, as you mentioned, throughout there that Batman and Alfred are going over. And one of the other the things that this one does that the books really did not do is it establishes that that Carmine Falcone is, as we said, is sort of this aging mobster that's sort of slowly losing his grip on power. And the opening scene in both the book and in the movie is him speaking with Bruce Wayne, trying to get him to come on board as a new quote unquote business partner, should sort of try to solidify, re-solidify his power. And he mentions that he and Bruce's father had worked together previously. We find out later that they had created this clinic for children in sort of some of the poorer parts of Gotham City. But it's sort of noted that Carmine doesn't really feel that he has an heir apparent, as his one and only son is this sort of skinny, nerdy type named Alberto, who is more concerned with doing crosswords and is sort of being kept at arm's length by his father, who doesn't see him as being worthy of being involved in the family business. And you see them have the contention in their relationship begin to mount as well. And so that kind of leads to all of these different threads of, could it be this guy? Could it just be the Joker? As as after the Joker confronts Falcone in his own bedroom on Christmas, as he's leaving, it's seemingly one of Falcone's bodyguards is gunned down in the street, and there's, along with a snow globe, is left a bunch of Joker cards as well. So could it just be the Joker? Could it be Falcone himself, or his sister, or this other rival mob boss, or could it be Harvey Dent? Or as we begin to, they sort of lead you down the path once more as we get to the final act, as the Joker is preparing to sort of dive bomb and poison Gotham Square, when perhaps tens of thousands of people are down there celebrating the New Year's. He prepares to sort of gas them all with Joker toxin, just because he says he thinks that about half the city is down there. And since he wants Holiday dead, he's got about a 50-50 shot of killing him, which I do think is a pretty great Joker logic thing. That's something that's carried over from the book. But as far as just a quirky thing, just a weird thing that the Joker would do, or the logic behind why he's doing it. It's not just because he's a homicidal maniac who's crazy. I mean, that is part of it, but there is this weird twisted logic in his head of, well, by law of averages, I have about a 50-50 shot of getting the guy without ever having to lay eyes on him. So,
what are you trying to prove with this stunt, Joker?
Prove? Stunt? Joker? No, wait, that one's right.
Why did you kill Johnny V?
What?
And Mickey Chen and Milos Grappa?
You think I'm Holiday? Oh, Puppet, I didn't know you cared. Of course I'm not Holiday. If I were him, why would I be trying to kill him?
Kill him?
He's the competition. And like the corn kernel always says, I won't be number 2.
If it's Holiday you want dead, then why gas everyone in Gotham Square?
Half the city's down there, which means Holiday either is or isn't. I have a 50-50 chance, and if I fail, well, at least I've killed a lot of innocent people.
I love that. I love that as a Joker motivation. I think that's pretty clever. But in the ensuing battle, there's sort of an illusion that the Joker makes that makes Batman realize that perhaps the killer is not anyone that he had thought of before, but the fact that it could be Falcone's son Alberto as well. And just prior to him going after the Joker, Bruce Wayne had been on the boat and had this interaction with Selina, and Selina, who it appears that she and actually we know this because of what happens later in the scene, but they do in fact know each other's identities, and
they just don't really it's sort of ambiguous though at the beginning. It doesn't seem like she repeats a line to him as they're out of costume that she had said in a prior scene when they were both in costume, and you kind of see Bruce react to that, letting you know that at least Bruce knows that she has put 2 and 2 together and realizes that she's Catwoman. But then later on, Bruce shows back up on the boat to sort of interrupt this interaction between Selina and Falcone's son, and she calls him Bruce. So yeah, apparently she had figured it out at some point that he was Batman, and he already knew as well, and that leads to kind of Batman's secret identity being exposed right then and there.
Yeah, so that's as Batman seemingly has come to confront the real killer, this Alberto, the Romans, measly little son who was never good enough, and decided seemingly that he wanted to take the family for himself and take it by force by eliminating all of the other sort of heir apparents to the throne. But as Batman sort of is confronting him, we see some fireworks go off, and we hear a loud bang, And that isn't just the pop of the fireworks, as it is made very clear that Alberto has been shot. And as we look up on one of the upper decks, we again see this man with this familiar pistol, and with the fedora and the black overcoat on, and lays a few more shots into Alberto, who he doesn't just get shot, he falls off the boat and is apparently sliced up by the rudder, the propeller of the ship. So about as dead could be. So that kind of ruins Batman's idea that he could be the holiday killer. And Batman gives chase, but the killer is able to sort of elude him in the crowd on the ship and then escape on a speedboat. And at the same time, so Batman is sort of left once again at square one, and we sort of get Gordon, Batman, and Dent reuniting one more time to discuss that their new number one suspect that they had just discovered, that being Alberto Falcone, is not the killer, nor does it appear that the Joker is the killer. So that sort of leads them back to square one, and that's how this part one of this movie ends. Or does it?
That's right. As you alerted me as we were preparing to go on, I got a nice message saying, "Hey, don't forget to watch the post-credit scene." And I said, "What?" Yeah, there's a post-credit scene here at the funeral for Falcone's son, Alberto, and Bruce Wayne is there, as of course is Falcone himself, Carmine, and Bruce is sort of there paying his respects. Falcone comes up and introduces Bruce to his associate, who shakes his hand, and this vine slips out from underneath of her sleeve and begins to wrap around Bruce's fingers, and there's a slow pan up to her eyes and Bruce's eyes as they turn green, and this sort of neon green, and it appears to be that this might be Miss Poison Ivy. And that's sort of where we're left as far as the cliffhanger for part 2. So with that, Liam, I guess just I will say full disclosure, before this week I had not read The Long Halloween, and that seems certainly sacrilegious as a Batman fan going into it. But I did on the amazing DC Universe app, probably my favorite app in the universe. I'll just say that. Just a wonderful application, a full catalog of DC comics at your fingertips, all contained on your cellular phone or tablet. I mean, what more could you ask for? Am I right?
I can't think of a thing.
That's right. So on the fantabulous DC Universe app, I did catch up and read the first 4 issues of this series, which ultimately is what make up the first part of this movie here. So I was able to do that. And I will say that I think some of the changes to the plot and, ultimately how the movie is written, it always has to be changed, right? Like sometimes that stuff just does not translate one-to-one. And I think honestly, with some of the movies that we've covered, if you go back and listen in the archives, one of the biggest gripes or complaints or critiques that we had, I should say, for the Batman Under the Red Hood movie was that it was a little bit too faithful to the book, in that it sort of added to the runtime and made things that were not relevant to kind of what we were watching on screen seem just out of place. There were some parts of it that just were not adapted well and sort of disrupted the flow of the movie. So because of that, I think that this changing things up a little bit, as far as I'm concerned, and again, somebody who was not a huge fan or didn't have a lot of experience reading the source material, I was okay with the deviation based on what I did read and what they chose to do with the story.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I think, is also just sort of taking similar scenes and sort of just tweaking them a little bit. We talked about, very minor changes like the Irish gang becoming a Chinese gang, but then even something like the sort of the reverse order in the book. He, Batman meets up with Catwoman actually at the Romans' high rise and then chases her, and then in the middle of the chase notices the bat signal and goes and has his meeting with Dent and Gordon. Whereas in the movie, obviously, it kind of happens in reverse, where he's having this meeting, and then while he's standing on the roof, he notices Catwoman, and she leads him. Catwoman also has a more active role in the first few issues, or in this one, compared to her first few issues. As far as in the comic book, we see a little bit more of Selina Kyle, and that in this version, obviously, as we said, she and Bruce know each other's secret, or at least discover it, whereas in the comic, that isn't really the case, and it's just Bruce and Selina both have a romance, or a budding romance, going on at the same time that Batman and Catwoman are sort of formulating their romance. So it's kind of this strange thing where even though they don't know that they are the same, they're all sort of courting each other in this strange just two people leading double lives. But in the movie, she has a more active role, as far as she's actually leading him to the Roman's money stockpile, as we talked about, and then she seems to have a more active role in helping him and being sort of one of his first. She helps him out when he's fighting off the Chinese gang later. She's active in helping him take them down so that he can get back after this Mickey Chen character. So they've certainly changed her role a little bit. And then, as we talked about, they sort of have increased the amount of play that Harvey's home life has here. And then sort of in the book, when after the explosion, Gilda's kind of just in the hospital and becomes very much a background player. And whereas here, her character and her arguments with Harvey and her sort of own fragile mental state is sort of adding to this stress and desperation that Harvey feels and wanting to take down the Roman and the rest of these criminals. So yeah, I will say that while I do love this book, and I would hate before I saw this, I probably wouldn't have said you shouldn't change anything. I probably would have been pretty stubborn about that. But I think for the sake of a whatever this is, 82-minute movie, and for the sake of expediency and for the sake of having a little more depth to your character, and even that little scene of Gordon at the house with his kids and his wife, kind of just reinforcing that all of these men and the toll that it's sort of taking on their personal lives. I think that's kind of worth it, even if it means a little less superhero action, or if it means changing things around a little bit, or a little more talking and a little less punching. I think for the most part, these are all things that you should do when you're adapting a thing. And yeah, doing a scene by scene adaptation, it's cool, and obviously it's certainly a way to go, and has been done with certain adaptations, as you said before, Cal. But overall, I would say most of the tweaks made for part one so far are not only are they not that big, but they're, for the most part, I think, for the better, and it's in the service of making you care more about the individual characters, as well as this overarching, superhero and supervillain and the mystery and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you have read this storyline before, or you kind of know where it's going, it's interesting because it does add some depth to more of the characters that you have that are likely to play a larger role, or to that. I mean, even without knowing the spoilers of who the killer is revealed to be in the original storyline, I think that it's important to kind of have the depth added where you can to these characters. You're not limited to 25 pages and with 9 panels on each page. Essentially, you can kind of flesh out some of the characters and give them more depth and dimension than you can in a smaller book form. So why not take advantage of that? And yeah, this I think is a little bit light on the action. It's certainly a more story driven movie, at least for this part one here. There is some action, and I think there's also some purpose behind some of the other fleshing out of characters. We mentioned this is loosely tied into what we believe to be sort of the new animated DC universe, if not already confirmed. I'm not sure if it's been officially confirmed, but there's been two other movies. Is it Superman, Man of Tomorrow, I believe, and then the Justice Society movie that also came out this year, are also sort of part of this DC animated movie universe that they started launching. The second version, 2.0, I don't know if there's a second name for this, but we were talking sort of before we went on the air, but if with Catwoman and Batman knowing each other's identities, that's a very easy parlay into doing an adaptation of the Batman Catwoman wedding storyline later on, or it sets up a Batman Catwoman movie later on if you want to adapt some of the more recent storylines that have been running in the comics. So it opens doors and it gives you more opportunity to sort of to bring this into a larger universe and not pigeonhole people into things, and set up future movies and tie-ins. So it that's the name of the game these days when it comes to most media, especially when it comes to super. So with all that said, I think that this is a very enjoyable movie. I think having the cliffhanger and it being condensed into one part, it is a lot. It does cover a lot. You have four different holidays essentially that are covered here, and you have a lot of story building to hopefully what we're going to see in the culmination in part two. But I think it's a good setup. I think that it's a good fleshing out. I think that there's a lot here, a lot of the ins and outs. It does feel very DCAU, Batman, the animated series adjacent at times, certainly Batman Year One with the crime families mixed in there. And it's a lot more mob boss heavy. Of course, you do have the Joker thrown in at the end. You don't really have the colorful rogues, which those stories are great and fun. But these darker detective stories are also have their fun and place as well. And I think that that's not something that you get to see a whole lot unless it's a specifically, a cartoon that's geared towards adults. So I appreciated the fact that this movie, again, for a specific audience, the direct to video or, direct to Blu-ray audience, gives you that opportunity to sort of not necessarily have to write for the younger audience and write a more mature story and something that deals with those more mature themes in the mob bosses that we loved so much from those original Batman the Animated Series episodes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think it takes its time, and it, like you said, it does have a lot to fit in. And this is obviously, as you said, only really an adaptation of the first 4 issues of the comic, of a 13-issue comic. So I will be curious to see how the pacing of part 2 goes. Certainly that'll be something we will obviously cover next week. But as far as just introducing the plot, now I think part of maybe the only issue where this fails is because it's a part 1. It is advertised as such, so it's not like people didn't understand that there was going to be a sequel or anything. So I'm not accusing them of false advertising or anything, but I think the only way where you could maybe critique the story is does this work as a standalone story, a standalone movie that you watch the way, just keeping in the theme of superhero stuff, of the Avengers Infinity War movie, which obviously ended on a cliffhanger, but it's a pretty satisfying and exciting movie in its own right. Whereas this really just like an 84-minute prologue to, part 2. I think maybe that's the biggest critique you could lay at this, is that it really only works in conjunction with the second part. And maybe that you could make some arguments that it should, maybe it should have a more triumphant ending. Maybe it should have ended with Batman catching the Joker as the end of part 1, and then you do the credit stinger to set up part 2. I don't know. I'm just sort of throwing out things here, but that's probably the biggest critique I could lay at it. Like I said, I don't mind them deviating from the source material as much. But I do think maybe if there is an area where it falls down, it's that it really does feel like this doesn't really stand up by itself. But again, it is labeled as a part 1, so maybe it's not supposed to.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on with that. I think if you're looking, and we'll talk about that later on as far as rewatchability is concerned, but yeah, this isn't something you can really watch in a vacuum. You know, it doesn't tie things up enough at the end. It's very much to be continued. Like, you know, if there had been a title card to be continued that came up, it would have been pretty poetic. You know, it feels like an elongated part 1 of an animated television show. So more than it does, you know, if you had gone and seen this in the theaters. And I know that that's something that movies have done and continued to do, as you mentioned, most famously, maybe the Marvel movies, or pretty much any major intellectual property these days will have a cliffhanger that leads you to the next season. But you know, it does in this way, I would say, maybe not stand up to a single watch by itself in a vacuum. So it relying on the next part really puts a lot of pressure on that next part to be somewhat satisfying, because that could really take a sour turn if it is not satisfying, or if it does not hold up, or does not seem very fulfilling. With that said, I think that with the way that everything moves, it didn't feel like it dragged at any point for me. I thought they did a good job of keeping things moving while telling a very in-depth tale. So I ended up giving plot a strong 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I actually gave it the exact same score, an 8 out of 10. I think it's very strong. It has a lot to juggle, but it doesn't feel really overstuffed at all. It's got a lot of characters to introduce, but I think it uses its time wisely, and it does make you care about these characters. And either in the sense of where the villainous characters, you're kind of waiting to see them get their comeuppance, but for, you know, I think you really do care pretty deeply about Harvey Dent, especially by the end of this, and his wife and his personal struggles, as well as the struggle to bring down these criminals. So I think they do a really good job with the time allotted.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that I will reserve judgment for the next part also. So if, not that I would go back and change my scores, but if the next part is not as satisfying, or I feel like it's a little rushed or any of that, then that could weigh heavier on the score next week for my plot than it would maybe on a general 2-part, 44-minute. So be interested to see how that goes. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be visuals and animation. And as you mentioned, this is not an animation studio that we're familiar with. It's not one of the typical ones, at least in the modern era. It's a little bit different, and the style, I would say, most familiar if you're looking at it. There is some influence here. We're looking at the retro 1930s brought into the modern era. There is certainly some homages with the vehicles, and certainly the style of certain cars and the way that people are dressed could be that sort of retro 30s, 40s look that the Batman the Animated Series made popular. But we do have a style that's akin to like an Archer-esque, or even Batman the Brave and the Bold, where you have cell shading and these characters that are look more akin to certainly Western animation as opposed to the more Eastern animation style of the prior DC animated movie universe. But they have these thick border lines around them that also sort of lead you to kind of draw inspiration from a comic book. So let's talk about visuals and animation here for you. And I will say, this animation looks nothing like Tim Sally, or Tim Sale, however you want to pronounce it, his artwork. That is one thing that I will say. You can say from the get-go here, and there's probably multiple reasons why, especially if they're trying to shoehorn this or jam this into a brand new animated shared universe here. They're not going to specifically make this look like something that is extremely stylized, extremely unique, in the way that Tim's work is. but it, in a way, I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more homages or direct visuals linking this, because other than the name itself and the plot, I feel like his style of art is what makes the part of what makes that comic so unique.
Yeah, it's a lot of like minimal background. It's very focused on silhouettes. The character designs are very they're very sort of exaggerated. Batman is this just hulking mass of muscle with this, he's in shadow for a lot of that book, and you very rarely see his face, and he has these big long ears, and he's sort of along with the inks and then the colors by Gregory Wright, he's sort of disappearing into the backgrounds of the scenes very often, and he's very often sort of enveloped in this shadow, and that there's sort of not a ton of facial detail, and it's more sort of it's a lot of people are very exaggerated, and they do kind of, the only one I think where they tried to really emulate that is maybe the Joker design a little bit. Mm-hmm. In that, if you read the comics, the Joker's in, especially the in issue 3, the Christmas issue, where he's breaking into Dent's house, and he's wearing the Santa hat and all that. He's almost like he's almost like a Gollum type creature. Like he's so lanky, and he sort of is crouched and hunched over. He has this like really strange, like like a horrific monster out of like a horror movie, like a goblin or something that you would see. And they kind of try to capture that a little bit, I think, with this Joker design. He's very tall and very skinny and kind of moves very strangely, but there isn't really an attempt to capture that, even with something as simple as having Batman have the very long ears, or even like a similar color palette on the suit, as far as like the in the comic it's the kind of the blue cape and cowl with the gray suit, and they don't really go for that. And that's a little bit of a disappointment. There are little homages, like after each murder you have a shot of the gun left at the scene with whatever the holiday ornament that's left behind, and then the name of the holiday pops up. Like that's sort of straight out of every single issue. Is usually the final shot of the issue is the murder that's taken place, and with that gun left behind, with the baby bottle nipple working as the silencer, and then the whatever the holiday ornament is that's left behind as well. So there's little aesthetic things they tried to put in there, but as far as any sort of direct adaptation of Tim Sale's style or Tim Sale's style, that really doesn't exist in this at all. And I do think that's a little bit of a disappointment for someone like me who is such a fan. And I think the atmosphere of that book and the sort of moody and exaggerated moments in that book are part of what makes it so memorable and so great, and really stands out among Batman stories for me is the art. And so without that, I still think there's some fun moments and some cool stuff, and we can certainly get into that. But as far as adapting anything, like I said, other than those little moments with the gun and the names of the holidays popping up, and then some of the sort of repeated imagery, like Joker walking out of the room and you see the bodyguards with the smiles on their faces, or the bodyguard laying down, face down in the street with the bloody Joker cards underneath of them. But as far as direct adaptations of any of Tim's art style, that unfortunately doesn't really exist here, other than the opening credits, where sort of there's shots lifted directly from the book, sort of overlaid on top of the opening credits. But we don't really get much of a chance or really even an attempt to adapt that style.
Yeah, that was a little bit disappointing. Obviously, I think even if you haven't read this, if you are a DC fan or if you are a fan at all, you will recognize that his artwork style is just very unique. It's its own style. There's no way of, like, you can look at the artwork and recognize immediately a Tim Sale or Tim Solly piece. Like it's clearly his artwork. So other than you mentioned, the credits I thought were great, and I was hoping maybe we would get some more of that in the closing credits, or maybe we'll see more of that in part 2. But I did appreciate that as we kind of see the credits lining up, and then there's this sort of chalk outline being drawn throughout as we get the names and of the different people involved in the movie overlaid, and we eventually see that it's drawn out a Batman symbol, and we've seen different flashes, as you mentioned, of different panels from the book itself. But I will say that I feel like they did their best to keep the palette fairly muted, because that's something else that I feel is a pretty important thing for at least those first 4 issues. Is while there is some splashes of color that come in when you get the Joker showing up, for a lot of the early issues, it's very muted. In some cases, scenes are intentionally done in black and white. So while not maybe faithfully adapting the art style or the complete muted colors that they chose to do for those books, it does not seem bright and exciting and like this crazy cartoon world that we're living in. It does seem very grounded and gritty and dirty and sort of murky at times for the majority, I would say, of the scenes that we see. Even when the Joker does arrive, he I feel like is even muted, with the exception of maybe the scene where he's decorating this Christmas tree inside Harvey Dent's house that he's broken into.
'Tis the season to be jolly. Outside it's an awful chiller. Boy, this holiday's a killer.
Gilda, is that you?
Gilda! She looks like a Gilda. Looking for this? Relax, lollipop. Police issue.
Where's my wife?
She's just where I left her. Last-minute shopping. Spoiler alert. It sucks.
What do you want?
Oh, I thought I was playing Santa Claus. Oh, all right. I want a fire engine and a football and to deliver a message.
Put the gun down and we'll talk.
I think some of the things that stood out for me, the sequence with Catwoman gave me some of the Chase Me vibes. The short that was included on the Mystery of the Batwoman DVD. There's a short little it's completely wordless, no dialogue, short where Batman's chasing Catwoman through Gotham City, and that may have in itself been an homage to the Long Halloween book, but I got some of those vibes. And I think Catwoman having a suit in this, similar to Batman the Animated Series, also with the gray and the sort of the black part to the face and the long black gloves and boots, definitely gave me some Batman the Animated Series vibes. But I think there was actually a couple of things that may have been an homage, as our friends at the Watchtower Database first pointed out. But the Batmobile itself also very much in the style of the new Batman Adventures Batmobile as well.
Yes, that is, and we should mention here the supervising producer on these more recent DC animated films has been one Mr. Butch Lukic, who of course worked as a director and a storyboard artist on going all the way back to the original animated series and then through Superman and Justice League and JLU as well. So a lot of DCAU in the DNA of Mr. Lukic, who's of course also gone on to direct and draw in shows like Ben 10 and a lot of other Warner Brothers animation projects before settling in as the supervising producer on this series of movies. So yeah, there's definitely some pretty classic DCAU Batman the Animated Series homages, both in Batman's general look is kind of, if you took the costume from the new Batman Adventures, and maybe he doesn't quite have the ridiculously simple, boxy square jaw that version has, but he's definitely some similarities there, as you mentioned, the Batmobile and Catwoman's costume. It even though I think it's a little hard to tell because a lot of her scenes are in the shadows, but it does have the sort of the gray with the black gloves and boots and the sort of the black accent on the mask. It doesn't have the gold belt, but that's a pretty reminiscent of her her Batman the Animated Series costume as well. So yeah, there's definitely some pretty fun DCAU homages. We do, as you mentioned, there's a scene where they go to Arkham Asylum and that building, which actually was there is a brief scene of them going there in the comic, and it's lifted from there. But I'm pretty sure Mr. Sale was also influenced by Batman the Animated Series and his design of Arkham, because it's very similar as far as the signage, and then this giant sort of facility on this long winding at the top of this long winding hill, very reminiscent of that sort of establishing shot that we would see in the animated series as well. So certainly in the backgrounds and the vehicles, and then some of the costuming as well. Definitely some DCAU in the DNA of this film, no question about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think overall, I really love the style that they ultimately went with. I think I was kind of watching it under the lens and thinking like, okay, if they had decided to do a Batman the Animated Series reboot, how would they have done it? Especially with the, modernizing the way that animation is done nowadays. This is hand-drawn digital animation. It's not completely CGI or, cell shaded over that CGI like we've seen in some more modern animation. But I was just kind of picturing, I was saying this would actually kind of fit in. I would enjoy seeing cartoons based on this sort of art style and artwork, because it does feel like it has its own identity, and certainly is not Batman the Animated Series, is not the new Batman Adventures, it's not Bruce Timm's style, but it doesn't feel all that different from it either. So it feels somewhat familiar. It certainly has some similarities to the Brave and the Bold style, and while not being quite as cartoony, a little more realistic. But some of the cityscapes, I think the way that Gotham was drawn, it does have that old Gothic feeling to it that Gotham typically has, but also sort of based on and certainly not alien to the DCAU style. They didn't go with the red skies, which I was disappointed in. I was hoping we get some red skies, but that would have been probably too on the nose for DCAU influences for us. So I will say there's some great sweeping shots of that. There's a bit of a car chase that we get between the Batmobile and I believe is it the Triad? Remember the Triad trying to escape. So there is some interesting sequences there. I will say, like we said though, it's a lot of dialogue heavy scenes in this, with the exception of when the Joker gets introduced. We have this really dynamic scene right out of the comic that takes place, a fight between Batman and the Joker. Actually, I think it's probably a little bit extended in the movie than it was in the comic book, but we have quite an interesting fisticuffs taking place as the Joker is attempting to release this Joker toxin across the crowd of people downtown in Gotham, and Batman and him are sort of fighting on the wing, and he uses his acid flower to shoot acid at Batman while he's on the wing, and there's quite a heavy fisticuffs that's going on in a battle to prevent him from releasing this toxin. So that sequence, I think, is probably for me the highlight and probably the most action heavy of the entire movie, maybe with the exception of Batman's fight against the Triad, which you sort of alluded to before.
Yeah, I think that sequence is pretty fun, and it's pretty much taken right from the graphic novel as well. There's just this kind of vicious, visceral fight between Batman and Joker, with it being in this unique setting of being in this like little 2-person Cessna airplane, and with that sort of added drama of the Joker trying to gas the city as Batman's trying to stop him, while also trying to sort of suss out whether or not the Joker is this holiday killer, or if the Joker knows who the killer really is. So it does add that interesting dynamic, and their fight is pretty fun. You see the Joker he has the Joker toxin. He also breaks out the acid at one point. I think that's a pretty cool. A lot of the effects as well are digital, as far as like the explosions and fire, and even it appeared this acid here where it's just this green stuff lands on Batman's shoulder, and sort of the smoke starts to rise, and then cut back and you see where it's burned through his suit and it's kind of burned his shoulder. So I think that's I think for the most part, the digital effects, the digital vehicles, or the CGI vehicles, look pretty good. And I thought they blended a lot better. Maybe they just blend a little bit better with this style, and with that extra cell shading put on them. But yeah, I didn't have as many issues with the CGI vehicles as we perhaps had when reviewing some of our regular DCAU shows. But yeah, I definitely think the two standout action beats are that one, and as you mentioned, when he's fighting the Chinese mobsters, and just that whole sequence is pretty fun. It starts out as this car chase with the Batmobile, and then spills out into this kind of Chinatown area that's sort of bathed in these lanterns that are all red, and so Batman and the different mobsters are all fighting, and they all have their unique weapons, and they're all kind of these different sizes. There's a giant guy that has a spear, and then one of them appears to have like nunchucks, and one of them has a sword and some throwing stars, and so you get some good variety there. And then of course this Catwoman gets involved and everything, and yeah. So I think overall, while this animation style isn't necessarily my favorite version of these characters, certainly, I do think they did try to make some interesting choices, even if they didn't necessarily try to directly adapt Tim Sale's style for this. But all that being said, I think they did a pretty good job. I liked most of the character designs and everything. I think they're all pretty on point. And for that reason, I gave visuals and animation a very strong 8 out of 10.
Yeah, so far we're 2 for 2. I gave it the exact same score. I think I would have given a perfect score just because I do like the style, but again, my issue is that it wasn't even attempted to sort of make this look like Tim Sale's artwork at all. I would say there was one moment where you kind of get Gordon's glasses, you get the white flash off of his glasses in a couple of scenes, mm-hmm. was very reminiscent of that style, but it's only kind of glimpses here and there. It's not, the character models themselves are not the same as you mentioned, with the exception maybe a little bit of how the Joker was done. But everything else is pretty much in the style of this universe that they're trying to build. So yeah, I think that just because you're basing it off of this comic book, and this comic book is so iconic, it was one of the main issues that I had with the Superman Doomsday model that they did, or even the Reign of the Superman movie that came on after that, or the Death of Superman, is that these are such iconic comic books, and then you're changing the style of the artwork. Even Batman the Killing Joke, you're changing the style, and that's what a huge part of what makes those comic books iconic is the artwork. So when you change and deviate from that, it's not just changing one or two things in the plot, like we said we were okay with. You're changing something that makes it feel like a different story in a way.
Yeah, totally. It definitely does give it a different vibe. I think they try to, and we'll certainly talk about that in voice acting, and we've already talked about the story. They really try to give it this sort of, give it that sort of creepy murder mystery feel. And there are scenes where you just see, like the killer loading the gun and sort of loading the bullets in before he goes and kills all of the Chinese mobsters in the restaurant. And so they are trying to, I think, emulate some of that stuff, but without that proper aesthetic. I think you can see what they're going for, but it doesn't quite give you that same feeling. And again, that's just part of what happens when you're translating it from a page to a screen. But then as we've been talking about, when this has to at least somewhat fit into an already established art style that's going to be part of a connected universe. You can't really have it be too too abstract or too stylized on its own.
There you go. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. And music was done by composer Michael Gatt for this week. I believe it's Gatt. I'm hopefully pronouncing that correctly. But Mr. Gatt was responsible for composing the music. He's done a lot of other composition for various movie projects. I believe he did DC Superhero Girls before this also. Amongst a lot of other credits to his name. But as far as the music is concerned, I didn't have a ton of notes. It feels like a lot of these direct-to-video movies are, that the music is not something that is it's not in the forefront. It tends not to be a major player. It's more thought of in how you would score a movie, and that is it's atmospheric. It adds to tension in scenes and adds to creating atmosphere where there needs to be, but it doesn't lend to having a strong heroic theme necessarily, or certainly one that I was able to pick out. Did you have any thoughts specifically on music?
Yeah, I think it does its best to sort of add that atmosphere. I think especially in the moments sort of before or just after one of the murders takes place. It's that very ominous strings that are sort of coming to, that come to that sharp crescendo, almost like something out of a horror movie or something, or a slasher film, I think is maybe what they were going for with that. I think there are scenes where I did notice it sort of, again, adding to that tension, but there isn't really a theme or a proper musical moment that really stood out to me the way that themes, obviously, that we talk about regularly in our regular reviews, or even something like a hero theme that you might hear in a live action Batman film or any superhero film. There's some very iconic pieces of music even for film versions of these characters. And I didn't really feel like we got much of that. Like I said, I think that the scene, for instance, when Harvey goes home and on Christmas and the Joker is there, you get that very shrill and ominous music as it's sort of revealed what's happening. And as that fight sort of begins to escalate and you sort of see Joker pull out the gun and then pulls out one of the holiday killers style of guns and asks Harvey if he's missing one. I think there's some good kind of shrill, intense music there, but the lack of like a proper like character theme, I feel like is maybe what brought my score down a little bit. And again, I don't think anything is bad, but I don't feel like anything stood out too strongly for me either, and that's why I ended up giving music a 5 out of 10.
Nice. I will say that the scene actually involving the Joker, where he's kind of escaping the Falcone mansion after he's sort of taken Falcone hostage, there is some music there that I did notate that was pretty fun, as he's sort of escaping with this gunfight between Falcone's bodyguard and him. There was some, it sort of ramped up a little bit there, and certainly on the airplane also the fight between Batman and the Joker was pretty it added to the atmosphere, but certainly created more tension and seemed to be different than the general mood setting music that was the majority of the movie, the rest of the movie. Hopefully we get more action sequences. It's hard. You're not going to have these dynamic themes come in when it's dialogue heavy. I feel like, so, which a lot of the first part here was these intense conversations, or even the conversation between Batman and Alfred in the Batcave. You're not going to have dynamic themes come in over top of it, be very out of place, obviously. So I gave the music a 6 out of 10. It's not because it didn't do its job. It's just there wasn't anything I felt like that stood out. I will say also, this soundtrack along with part 2 soundtrack are available I believe, on streaming services, music streaming services, and you can probably find it on YouTube also if you're interested in listening to some of the work that Mr. Gatt did for this movie. So check it out if you got the time. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final categories. You mentioned we have a big vocal cast this week for our voice actors. So without further ado, let's discuss this week's voice cast.
Yeah, and there's quite a few. We probably I'm just going to kind of read out most of the names now, and then we can get to some of the bigger stars. But we have Greg Chun as Mickey Chen. We briefly have Fred Tatasciore as Grundy. We briefly have David Dastmalchian as Calendar Man, who folks would know as the Polka Dot Man in the recent Suicide Squad movie.
Solid. I thought he did a solid job. It was that scene itself, the dialogue between Batman, Calendar Man, and Gordon is there as well. I thought it was very enjoyable. It's a brief bit of dialogue, it's a scene probably, but you leave really feeling like, Calendar Man is one of those silly Silver Age villains that kind of always doesn't fit. Seems like he doesn't fit into modern day. Obviously they added a sinister edge to him, doing murders on various holidays, but always felt like he was a Days Gone By type villain. So creating this sort of sinister edge to him, but it being a very subtle, sinister type, like haunting serial killer type vibe to him. Very, very, very Silence of the Lambs sort of Hannibal Lecter type vibe to him, with Batman and him talking between the glass at Arkham Asylum. So very, very great performance by that actor who obviously, as you mentioned, Suicide Squad, and then previously in the Christopher Nolan films in The Dark Knight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that scene is great. And that is something that is maybe touched on a little bit more in the book, but they do sort of have that discussion, both Batman and Gordon, and then a little bit with Calendar Man. The sort of pokes at the idea that I think gets brought up maybe more now than it used to, maybe almost too much now, but the idea of whether or not Batman is, more attracting these insane criminals than he is actually helping to stop them at this point. And then sort of also, having this Calendar Man who, speaks in these really sinister sort of riddles about what's going on and seems to know almost everything, and then kind of clues Batman in that the Joker's escaped and all that. Yeah, I do think that's a really tremendous scene. And speaking of the Joker, we have Troy Baker, who we have previously talked about as he voiced the Joker in the Arkham Origins video game, as well as the Assault on Arkham deep straight to DVD movie. Has voiced the character a few other times. I have the same critiques about him I had the last time we talked about him, which wasn't that long ago, which is that he's very clearly doing an impression of Mark Hamill, which I think made more sense when he was playing a younger version of that Joker. And I maybe would have liked to have seen him try to stretch his legs, because he's a very talented actor. Is one of the sort of, he's probably on the, the Mount Rushmore of like video game actors of the 2000s. He's, him and Nolan North and people like that are just constantly in video games because they're so good at it and can have a lot of talent. They just don't, I guess that I still, I don't have a lot new to say. You can hear, I think, more of our thoughts on his performance as Joker if you go back in the archives and hear our episode where we talked about Assault on Arkham. Like, I don't think he does a bad job. Like, I think he's sufficiently sinister in that scene where he's threatening Harvey, and then that final scene with Batman. But I also think, like, hey, why don't is Mark Hamill too expensive? Like,
yeah, I don't have as much of a problem, I think, with his performance. I think we talked about that. You can check that out from last month's episode that we talked about that, as you mentioned, in the Assault on Arkham, in the archives at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app. But I will say that I feel like at times it did feel like he was trying to stretch it and not sound like a complete ripoff. But then there are other times where it's just like, man, you really are. You just listen to just hours of Mark Hamill's performance here, and you're just doing an impersonation of it. I can take him in small doses. I think that if he had been throughout the entire movie, it would have brought my score down ultimately a little bit, just because, it is not Mark Hamill. It's somebody doing how long can you listen to somebody doing an impersonation of somebody, even if it's a really good impersonation of somebody? Like the person that does the best, John Madden or Donald Trump impersonation, like how long do you want to actually listen to somebody do that? Like very small spurts if you want to listen to that, like, and then they're gonna say, all right, well, I've had enough of that. So there's a reason why impersonations, people that do impersonations typically do more than one, because just one impersonation gets tired real quick.
Yes, yeah, I will say I think he does a good laugh. I think he's got a couple of scenes, both when he's confronting Falcone and then at the end when he and Batman are fighting the plane, where he's really got to kind of let loose with a more sort of archetypal classic Joker laugh. And I think his laugh is pretty unique and doesn't sound like he's just trying to date Mark Hamill's version. So I will give him credit there. I think it's a pretty strong Joker laugh. But yeah, rapid fire throughout some of these other characters. We have Jack Quaid, who folks might know from the Amazon series The Boys. Playing Alberto Falcone. Again, we sort of get more to do in this than the character had in the original books, at least in those first few issues. As prior to his death, they sort of set up this resentful relationship between him and his father, who was played by Titus Welliver in this, who folks might know from The Town or Argo, playing Falcone here. Yeah, I mean, I think that relationship and that scene, I think the scene at Thanksgiving where Alberto's kind of trying to stand up for himself and is telling Carmine that he sent the Dents flowers after their house was blown up, and Carmine kind of grabs him by the throat and really talks down to him. I think that's a pretty dramatic and interesting scene. So I think they play well off each other.
Is there something you wish to say?
No, Papa. Except to point out that Harvey Dent is still alive.
Because I allow it. For now. I can forgive sloppy. What I will not tolerate is you presuming to speak on behalf of this family. Let me be perfectly clear. Again. Any notion you may hold about being next in line to take over our business interests is a pathetic delusion. End of discussion.
Yeah, I think between his scenes with Jack Quaid as Alberto, and then getting to interact with Troy Baker's Joker, with Batman and some of the other mobsters, I think Mr. Welliver gets a lot to do here, and he does a good job of playing that sort of aging mob boss that's trying to hold on to his power and all of that. So yeah, I think he does a very good job there. And then sort of rapid fires, we're wrapping up here. We have Alistair Duncan reprising his role as Alfred. He previously had played the character on the Batman cartoon and a couple other animated projects as well. I like him. I mean, it's we know who #MyAlfred is on the show. Obviously, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. on Batman the Animated Series is still sort of the gold standards. But as far as other actors that have played that Alfred role since, I think Mr. Duncan is pretty easily my number one.
Yeah, he's really, really good. It feels very authentically Alfred. I think his interactions with Bruce, as I mentioned, that first interaction and that dialogue between him where he says we have to endeavor to lift it up again. Just great. And then of course there's some banter between him and Batman on the comm link and on the Batmobile screen, and even a little bit of interaction between Alfred and Selena Kyle at Thanksgiving with some comedy thrown in. So there's some good dialogue there. He's really, really good. Would definitely receive my vote for a future casting in whatever medium it is, because he's a really good, solid Alfred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good warmth to him especially when he's talking to Batman there, that really do feel like that fatherly side of his relationship with Batman. But yeah, speaking of that, we will be wrapping up here with our last few actors here. We have Josh Duhamel playing Harvey Dent, which people know him from Transformers, or more recently in the Jupiter's Legacy Netflix show.
Yeah, he's really good. Very talented actor, I would say. I'm a fan of his run on the NBC evening soap opera Las Vegas. It was a James Caan show back in the day. I thought he was fun on that. That was an enjoyable role for him. But yeah, I'm a fan of Mr. Duhamel's acting, and I think that he puts in a good day's work here as Harvey, especially as we kind of get this constant allusion to him being of two minds. And, it's done not quite with a wink to the audience, but you obviously know where it's headed. We didn't get to talk about it, but they even do a sort of visual trick after the house is blown up and Harvey is in the hospital bed. He's kind of half in shadow, and you're almost suspecting that it's going to reveal that he's been viciously scarred. And as he escapes the hospital and Jim Gordon chases him down later, he kind of pulls him aside, and you finally see the other half of Harvey, and he just has a couple scratches on him. It's not completely disfigured as you might expect. So I did appreciate the teases, not only visually, but then some of the discussions that he has with Batman in that initial scene when they're deciding whether or not to burn the money, and then as he's talking with Gilda later on, he sort of covers half of his face and talks about his struggles and trying to meet her in her mental angst, and clearly it seems not being able to have children and her disappointment with that, and him almost constantly reminding her that they can start a family and not being able to have kids of her own. So
yeah, I think that is a big part of it, and that's a theme that we often see in Batman stories and superhero stories, is you're fighting these monsters, fight monsters for so long, and it's the Dark Knight line, right? It's the you die the hero or you live long enough to become the villain, and that's sort of him sort of going down this path where he's fighting dirty against dirty opponents, and how dirty can you get before before you're just as dirty as they are. That's definitely a theme. And Mr. Duhamel's performance as Harvey Dent here definitely helps tell that story. And then wrapping up, we have Naya Rivera, sadly the late Naya Rivera as Catwoman. Folks would probably know her best from her role on Glee, but she very tragically drowned about a little over a year ago, and I believe this will be her last credited role. Will be this and part 2 of this. I think she's a good cat. Obviously, the loss of life it's not tragic because she can't play Catwoman anymore. Obviously, it's tragic because a very young woman who was a mother lost her life. But yeah, obviously, it's I think for whatever it is worth in the context of what we're reviewing, I like her Catwoman. I like her interplay and her dialogue, especially with Batman, and I think she brought kind of an exciting life to the character. That brings us to our Batman. Mr. Jensen Ackles, who, of course, folks know from Supernatural. And, of course, famously to this show, a performance you did not care for in the Batman Under the Red Hood movie as Jason Todd, a.k.a. the Red Hood. But that everyone else seems to just adore and wants him to play that character in live action, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But yes, Jensen Ackles here as Batman. And I will say this, I think he has that, if you've ever heard him talk, if you ever watched Supernatural, he has that sort of growly, gravelly voice to him, to, his natural way of speaking. And I think that fits Batman better maybe than it fits a more animated or excitable character like the Red Hood is kind of supposed to, especially by the end of that movie. And I do think that final scene in Under the Red Hood he does a pretty good job there. But I know you weren't thrilled with that performance, but I guess I'll pose this as more of a question: is he a better Batman than he was a Robin or a Red Hood?
Unequivocally, yes, absolutely. I think there are times that in this, I would say that his performance is uneven at times. It's a little flat in some areas. His dialogue as Batman, I think, is where, depending on the scene, is not as strong. I think his performance as Bruce is actually stronger than his performance as Batman. Unfortunately, we don't get a whole lot of Bruce. But this that we get between him and Alfred, as we mentioned, him kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and then in addition to that, you know, some of his interactions with Falcone at the party, or his interactions even with Selina, I think they're good, and I think that his interaction with Troy Baker's Joker, I think, is probably the strongest portion of the Batman dialogue. It's uneven at times, but I think I like him better as Batman. His delivery is different than his delivery as Jason Todd / the Red Hood from Under the Red Hood. And I think it suits it just fits him a little bit better. I think maybe he's had a few different roles under his belt now doing voice acting. Maybe he's a little bit more seasoned in the ability to do that. It's a little less wooden at times, and it feels a little less like he's reading off of a script as he's delivering things. So I would say a major improvement over what I felt like was a lackluster performance in the Red Hood, Under the Red Hood film, which you can hear our review of that in the archives at DCAUreview.com as well if you're interested. But I think that this was a much better performance overall. Still uneven at times, but solid, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, I think that covers a lot of it. I don't think he's great by any means, but I think, yes, I definitely think he's better suited for Batman, and does have moments where I think he's genuinely very good, both in some of those interactions with Naya Rivera's Catwoman, with Troy Baker's Joker, and with Alistair Duncan as Alfred. So yeah, overall, I think a pretty darn strong voice cast. Maybe not like a superstar breakout performance, but a lot of really good, solid work being put in. And again, this is part one. You're laying the foundation for what's to come still. So altogether, I ended up settling on another 8 out of 10 for my voice acting score.
Nice. I gave it just a tick lower. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I think that there's not one performance that I say was outstanding. I think that there are some good performances, nothing super great. And I'm interested to see when we know that there are more rogues from the Rogues Gallery coming in part 2, and certainly what appears to be, at least by the cover art for part 2, a transformation of Harvey Dent into Two-Face, what the voice acting looks like in part 2 from some of the same actors as well as additional actors in part 2. So looking forward to hearing that next week, but still a solid score from both of us, a higher end, just a tick higher from you, but nonetheless, good scores all the way around here. So all right, Liam, let's tallying up our scores here. I end up with a pretty solid, I guess you would give it, a final score of 29 out of 40. What about you?
Pretty strong final score of the exact same. I also have a 29 out of 40.
There we go. A little math on the run there. We were both doing math in our heads. So, we ended up coming up with the same score there. It's hard to talk about this. Again, we kind of already alluded to this in a vacuum. I think that this is going to have to be a to be determined, a TBD, as far as is this a rewatchable one or not, because it does really hinge on part 2. And how well part 2 is executed. And I would defer to you as a fan of this comic book and a bigger fan of the comic book of the original source material. But it sounds like to me, as you kind of already alluded to, that this wouldn't necessarily stand up on its own as a must watch. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think there's enough moments sort of homaged from the graphic novel, and it's kept faithful enough that if you're a big fan of this of the graphic novel, of the mini series, or I guess maxi-series as it would be called in comic book lingo. Yeah, I think this is worth a watch on that side. But yeah, as far as it standing alone, how does it stand by itself as a movie? Like you said, it's really probably going to depend on how part 2 leaves us feeling next week. So that's our own little cliffhanger for you to come back next week and find out if indeed part 1 gets the thumbs up for rewatchability based on perhaps how its conclusion in part 2 is dealt with.
Very excited to do that. All right, Liam, well, let's wrap up this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. You will not want to miss next week's exciting conclusion. First time we've said that, Liam, to be continued in the history of the DCAU review here. Follow up next week and hear our thoughts on part 2 of Batman: The Long Halloween. Looking forward to doing that with you. Don't forget, follow us on social media at DCAU Review, both on Instagram and Twitter. Lots of exciting stuff going on in the world of the DCAU. We have some comic reviews coming up, both the next issue of Justice League Infinity as well as Batman: The Adventures Continue, both raging towards their final conclusions, at least for this season, at least. So exciting stuff going on there. Of course, once we get past part 2, we'll be talking about what we'll be discussing for the month of November and ultimately December we have coming up here. Lots of good stuff on the calendar ahead of us, Liam. Very excited, though. Don't forget, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, whatever you're listening to, if it allows you to give a 5-star review and a little paragraph about what it is that you like about us. We would very much appreciate that. You can also support us if you wish by purchasing a hat or a shirt. Also at the bottom of our podcast, you should see a little link that says support this podcast. So if you just want to support the podcast, we had a message from somebody this week, Liam, on in our DMs that said, yeah, I didn't want a shirt, I didn't want a hat, so it was nice just to be able to throw a couple bucks your guys' way. So that was very kind of them. We appreciate all of our supporters. And whether you throw a couple dollars our way, or maybe you just support us with a follow, as we mentioned, follow us on social media. You can also subscribe to us on the Pod Tower. That's right, we are on YouTube. Our full catalog is there as well. Not only do you get content from us, but you get content from our friends over at the Watchtower database, as well as Tim Talk, both podcasts that discuss not only DCAU, but all things DC animated. So you'll find lots of content from them also on that channel. Subscribe to that. That helps us out also. Liam, very excited for the exciting conclusion of next week as we get into part 2. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.